prepping for tonight, going through past results in all of these states that are voting tonight, one of the things I found fascinating, and it's not true for all of these states, but it's true for most of them, is that in the general election in November, when it was Obama versus McCain in 2008, the electorate in most of these states voting tonight was majority female. But in the Republican primaries in most of these states, the Republican electorate was mostly male. So you need to win guys over in order to win the Republican primary, but you better not do that in a way that alienates women, or you will pay for it in the general election. With that in mind, how did the contraception issue and Rush Limbaugh these past couple of weeks help or hurt the Republicans tonight?
Well, Ms. Fluke, and the rest of you feminazis, here's the deal. If we are going to pay for your contraceptives and thus pay for you to have sex, we want something for it. And I'll tell you what it is. We want you to post the videos online so we can all watch.
How to say this, which is, it's not the language I would have used.
The reason I called Ms. Fluke is because I thought about Malia and Sasha, and one of the things I want them to do as they get older is to engage in issues they care about, even ones I may not agree with them on. I want them to be able to speak their mind in a civil and thoughtful way. And I don't want them attacked or called horrible names because they're being good citizens.
The president today at a press conference in response to a question about why he weighed in, why he called Sandra Fluke in the middle of the Rush Limbaugh controversy over the contraception issue. In the latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll, in a theoretical matchup between President Obama and Mitt Romney, this is what Chris was talking about earlier, President Obama leads Mitt Romney among women by 18 points. When you look at that, poll result, and when you look at this dynamic that we've all been watching unfold over these past couple of weeks, Steve Schmidt, let me start with you as the senior strategist for the McCain-Palin campaign. Is that undoable, and how do you undo it?
This is a huge problem for Republicans, and this week has been a disaster on this front on a number of different, in a number of different ways. And the notion that we're going to define conservatism around the issue of contraception is just lunacy. And there's been so much commentary that the Republican Party is moving further to the right on these issues. I don't think it's moving further to the right. It's moving to outer space. And the problem is that a majority of the electorate in November is going to be women. And you watch the president's comments on that. There was no reason in the world why Governor Romney couldn't have picked up the phone and called Sandra Fluke. It wasn't about her policy position, which I happen to disagree with. It's the notion as a father who has a daughter that a woman would be demeaned like that by a professional bully in the way that Rush Limbaugh did it. It was disgusting, and it was a huge missed opportunity for Governor Romney. And on top of it, it points out to a dysfunction in the Republican Party, which is increasingly the definition of conservatism and who's a real conservative is defined by fidelity to the personality of these talk radio hosts and fidelity in support of their most outrageous statements. This is not a sign of a healthy political party, and you see this now manifesting itself in all of the polls, whereas this process has gone on. You see a degradation of support for the Republican Party's position generically and the Republican candidate specifically. And I think if you're a Republican running for Congress, you're a Republican running for Senate, you really have to be worried about this in a number of different ways. And when you look at his comments specifically, I just think there's a simple adage here, is that everybody who plays by the rules deserves to be treated with respect. She went before the Congress. She offered her opinion, and she was attacked in the most vicious way. It was an embarrassing moment, I think, for the millions and millions of decent people out there who are members of the Republican Party.
The point that you're making, though, about how Republican politics are defined in part by fidelity to various talk show hosts,
sure.
It's one of those issues on which there is no mirror image. I mean, Al, right. Ed, me, we've all been in liberal talk radio. I don't know that any politician has ever been defined based on whether they agreed with something that one of us said or anybody else on the liberal side has said. Why is it that media figures on the right end up being so interwoven with the Republican Party that they have to answer for each other? It's not like that on the left.
Well, I think that part of it is that they have made Rush Limbaugh the de facto, George Will said it, leader of their party. And
how?
By him being the one that drums up their base. He interprets what is the policy for their base. Right. They all have bowed at his altar. But I think that what is going to be critical in this election, Chris hit on it. You know, when he brought up the analogy of Dr. King in the civil rights era, it may not be a perfect analogy because Dr. King was, as he said, in shackles in Georgia and feared to be killed when Kennedy called. But you remember now, I was in Alabama the last 3 days. The Kennedys and Martin Luther King III has helped me lead this march I'm going back to. Dr. King and many of them were not for Kennedy. In fact, Dr. King's father was for Nixon. Wow. The phone calls showed a sensitivity. There was a lot of criticism at the time that Kennedy was flirting with the Alabama segregationists. The phone calls showed he had a heart or a sensitivity. I think what Romney and Santorum failed to do was show the sensitivity. Said, forget politics. A woman shouldn't be called this, and I want to personally show myself sensitive. And I think that's what the president's call did. They could have turned it around by also calling. I think that window's closed now because I think women say, you don't care that you're going to call a Georgetown student sitting before the Congress speaking her mind a slut. You're not sensitive to that. You can't fake that. Either you are sensitive or you're not. Kennedy got a lot of ground that he may not even politically was prepared to deserve at the time because he showed he cared enough about a human being who was fighting segregation. They had an opportunity to show that to women. They failed big time.